Welcome to the Film Florida podcast. I'm John Lux, and I'm the Executive Director of Film Florida. Before we get to our interview, if you're not already a member of Film Florida, please consider joining at filmflorida.org. Please also consider going to our website and donating $20.26 for our 2026 fundraising campaign. Visit the Film Florida merchandise page at filmflorida.creator-spring.com to purchase Film Florida t-shirts, sweatshirts, coffee mugs, and more. All merchandise proceeds go to the Film Florida Filmmaker Grant and Scholarship Fund. Jason Fisher is the founder and CEO of StageRunner, an online platform created to empower soundstage owners and to serve as a growing platform for the broader production community. Jason created StageRunner after recognizing the need for a centralized hub connecting filmmakers with ideal production spaces. Beyond being a marketplace, their goal is to build a thriving ecosystem that supports the entire film and television industry. Prior to StageRunner, Jason was the Vice President of Production at ABC Studios, overseeing blockbuster shows Lost, Desperate Housewives, and Grey's Anatomy, and was the Senior Vice President and Head of Production at AMC, overseeing hit shows such as Mad Men, Breaking Bad, and The Walking Dead. And he was also the Executive Vice President and Head of Production at Paramount Television. We talk all of this and more on this episode of the Film Florida podcast. Here's my conversation with Jason Fisher from StageRunner. Welcome to the Film Florida podcast, Jason.
Thank you. Thrilled to be here. Nice to see you, John.
So let's kind of start at the beginning. Give us your backstory. Help the audience get to know you a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. I'm originally from Connecticut. Grew up on the East Coast. Went to high school in Connecticut and really grew up as an artist. I was obsessed with everything that had to do with drawing, painting, ceramics, sculpture, you name it. I was one of those highly introverted kids who was most comfortable sitting alone in the art studio or in the corner of the schoolroom, doing my own thing and drawing. And so I knew that I wanted to always do something in a creative field. And as I moved through school, eventually I ended up going to Tulane University in New Orleans and went to their School of Architecture. They've got an incredible architecture program there. If you've ever been to New Orleans, you know they've got amazing architecture all over the city, blends from, styles and cultures all around the world. And so that was an amazing experience for me, and wasn't sure that I wanted to be an architect per se after college, but my father was a television producer, and my father was a business affairs guy at CBS in New York. He was a lawyer and then went over to CBS and then eventually started his own production company just as cable was getting started. And all of the cable operators, this is like, the early days of cable when, there were 3 or 4 cable channels that had anything on them. There was like USA and a few other channels, but they all desperately needed programming. And so he entered the business with this amazing timing and opportunity. And so he started a production company and started producing very inexpensive shows, children's shows, animal shows, that kind of stuff. And he built up, a small but really great business. And so in the back of my mind, when I would hang out with him on set and follow him around in the office, it was always something that I thought, boy, is there a way that I could connect my experience as an artist and architecture as well as in the creative field of film and television? And so my plan after college was me and my roommate decided we were going to drive to LA. I don't know where I got the hubris to think that, oh yeah, we'll just go to LA and figure it out. But that's exactly what we did. And my father was based in New York and really didn't have many connections in LA. Again, this is before the internet and before any of that. So New York entertainment and LA entertainment were 2 very different worlds. So I moved to LA and my plan was I'm going to be a production designer because that would be a great way for me to combine both my experience and my love of film and television and using some of my artistic skills and love for those fields. And so that gets us, I guess, probably through chapter one.
All right. So we're going to eventually get into StageRunner, which is the main part of this discussion. But when you got to LA, amongst other things, you eventually got into being the senior vice president and executive vice president of production and head of production for projects like Mad Men, School of Rock. Tell us a little bit about some of your, early roles and eventually getting into some of the executive roles.
Yeah. So when I got to LA, the first job I had, this was 1994, and so if you remember, anyone who remembers back then, the early 90s was the heyday of the sitcom.
Of course.
So multi-camera sitcoms were everywhere, John. It was, Seinfeld and Friends, Home Improvement. It was one after another, multi-camera sitcoms, and I somehow talked my way onto CBS Radford lot and got a job as a production assistant on the very short-lived George Wendt show, which was George Wendt, for most people probably don't remember. He was kind of the heavy-set guy who sat at the end of the bar and drank beer on Cheers.
Norm.
And when Cheers was ending, he got his own show, and that was the George Wendt show. We did 8 episodes and were canceled, but I had, my foot in the door and, really started learning and loving the business and loving being in production. Loved the community aspect of it all. Loved this idea of walking into an empty office and 5 weeks later having essentially a startup business from nowhere with, 200 people building an incredible product. And so from day one, I just loved it. And so I worked in freelance production for about the first dozen years of my career. First, again, was a PA, then got hired as a production coordinator. I won't go through all the boring credits. Then was an associate producer, and then eventually became a line producer and was producing multi-camera sitcoms, live event shows, game shows, talk shows. And again, this was really kind of the boom of original programming on cable. And so it was really interesting. I got into the business at such an interesting time because when I first arrived, it really was the migration or the growth from network television when we had 4 networks, CBS, ABC, Fox, and NBC, to now where we've got HBO and then all of the other cable channels that came along with it, who were all now looking for original programming, but premium original programming. And so it was a very exciting time. And so I was producing shows both for the networks, big shows, and then had my own production company and was producing really small shows, cable shows, like I mentioned. And there was one year where I didn't get a pilot. And back then, it was all about doing as many pilots as you could, because if you got a pilot, that meant that the following season you would have a show to go work on.
Right.
And the pilot season was always a big deal. There was, 10 to 1, a couple hundred pilots being shot every summer. And this one season, I didn't get a pilot, and I was sort of panicking, thinking to myself, "Oh boy, what am I going to do next season? If I don't have a pilot now, I'm not going to get a series." And right around that time, I had gotten a call from the head of production, Barry Jossen, who was running production at ABC Studios at Disney, which is where I had done a lot of producing, asked me if I wanted to come over and be a production executive during their pilot season, because they have so much more volume at that time, had so much more volume during pilot season that they often brought on extra help to help them manage all of those shows and get them produced on budget, on schedule, and get delivered in time. And so I went over to the studio and got a taste for what it was like to work at the Walt Disney Company. Again, lifelong dream to go work at Disney. And so to be on that lot at such an exciting time was incredible. And so then I ended up actually staying there as a vice president of production. And again, just talking about luck and timing, the year that I got to ABC Studios and started full time happened to be the year, I forget what year exactly it was, but this was the year that we produced, I mean, we, the studio, not me, myself, we produced Lost, Desperate Housewives, and Grey's Anatomy all in the same season. Those were 3 pilots that were done in the same year. So it was an incredible time, not only to be alive as a TV viewer, but to be within Disney at exactly that time was amazing. And it was, sort of seminal moment in television where we really saw, wow, this is what a network show can be: bigger in scale, bigger in production, bigger in the stories that they were telling, more serialized stories. And so it was a very exciting time. And so after being at Disney as a vice president for 4 or 5 years, I then went over to AMC. AMC was just getting started with their original programming. At the time, they were really just, essentially a library company that was licensing movies. They would license Shawshank Redemption and put it on for, 24/7 and sell advertising against it. And it was a great business back in the day. This is when, there was still Blockbuster, and people would either rent a movie on a Friday night or they would turn on AMC or HBO or Showtime. There were a few movie channels at the time, but AMC was one of the basic cable channels that you could get for free. And they would run a ton of advertisements against that. And they decided that they wanted to get into original programming. And so originally they licensed both Mad Men and Breaking Bad from both Lionsgate and Sony, respectively. And they decided, hey, we're spending all this money licensing these shows. Why aren't we producing them ourselves so that we can then own the shows? And so that was when I got hired at AMC. And again, as luck would have it, the first show that we produced in-house was The Walking Dead, which, was a show immediately that we thought was going to be, a big hit, essentially a big action horror show that wasn't actually very expensive to produce, but had incredible storytelling, amazing auspices, attached, Frank Darabont and everyone else who came with that show. So again, that was a huge hit. AMC from there went on to produce a lot of great shows. So I was there, AMC, that was in New York. And so I had moved to New York and was living in New York for 4 or 5 years. Eventually really wanted to get back to LA. And at this time we were, back into our history lesson, we were now starting to see the internet proliferation really happening. And everyone was starting to see things are now starting to change. And streaming, we knew eventually was going to become a thing. YouTube was just getting started. Netflix had gotten started. They were still a rental business, and they were, mailing DVDs in the mail to their subscribers. And this is right around the time that they got into original programming. I want to say this is 2010 or 11. And then they got started with, their original shows, first with Lilyhammer and then House of Cards, then Orange is the New Black. And so essentially the gun went off there that now we've got a new player, and the way that they're going to be distributing their shows is streaming over the internet. And so again, we saw, all of us in the industry, now we had another chapter, right? We went from originally broadcast, then to basic cable and premium cable, and now into streaming. And so when I left AMC, I went next to Paramount to be the head of production at Paramount Television. And again, it was an incredible time. I was excited by the opportunity because Paramount has such an incredible library of IP. And now all of a sudden there were so many different buyers out there in the marketplace who were now looking for their own version of a premium original show. And so for me, Paramount was an incredible opportunity to go and mine that incredible library and then sell those shows to the Netflixes of the world, but then everywhere else. There was, Stars and Showtime and all of the other premium cable channels that were at that time just getting going. Everyone was doing the sort of HBO, AMC original playbook. And so I was at Paramount for a number of years, and then, eventually went back to Disney, where we advanced a few years, but Disney Plus was now building their own streaming platform. They saw the writing on the wall. They had been amazingly licensing many of their movies and series to Netflix, realizing eventually that they were going to be responsible for their own demise. And so they realized they needed to build out their own global streaming platform. And so, having still a number of friends at Disney, I was brought back in to run production at Disney Plus, which again was an amazing experience and opportunity. This was 2018, 2019, which we'll call, I think, peak TV. This was the moment really where Wall Street and the industry rewarded growth and subscription at all costs. And at the time, no costs, because this was the time when basically interest rates were zero and Netflix stock was, going to the moon, and Wall Street saw, get subscribers, get as many people globally on board to your streaming service. You'll figure out the monetization model eventually. And so when I was dropped into Disney at that moment, it was an amazing time of free-for-all spending. The first show that I worked on was The Mandalorian, but essentially I was, me and the team there was responsible for working with all of the internal studios within Disney. And I don't think most people realize that at the time, and probably still today, there were at least 16 internal studios just within Disney. If you think about, this was just after the Fox acquisition. And so you have Pixar, Marvel, Lucasfilm, ABC, Fox, ESPN, and it goes on and on just within the company of Disney. And so they were looking to essentially communicate, aggregate, develop, and then produce shows for the Disney Plus platform. And so my job was essentially to work with all of those internal studios, developing and producing shows that eventually would land exclusively on the Disney Plus platform. And so that really gets us up until just a few years ago.
So that's terrific context for StageRunner, because it would have been easy for you in that time to just do what you were doing. I mean, obviously very successful, a lot going on, but you decided to do something different. So for those that might not be familiar with StageRunner, describe the core mission and the problem you set out to solve with the company, given all of your experience up until that point.
Yeah, great question. Well, I'll back up just for a moment. While I was still at Disney and overall in the industry, what had happened was now we were seeing so much production happening globally. Around the world, there were, 1,000+ shows and movies being produced every year. And what we saw in the industry was a proliferation of a few things. The first is tax incentives. There were not only states within the US, but there were now countries who were developing and deploying a really aggressive tax incentive programs to attract film and television projects from the studios. And the reason that they were building out these incentive programs is, one, they create a lot of jobs, they create a lot of tax revenue, but they also create a great halo effect of tourism. And so attracting big film and TV shows became very big and very competitive business. And so while I was at Disney, we had a few departments who were completely dedicated to taking advantage of these tax incentives, which could have a real significant impact on your budget as a producer. And you could realize really significant savings depending on where you went and what soundstage you used. But there were also a lot of problems with it as a producer. Let's say you were going to go film in Budapest because you want to take advantage of the tax incentive. You may get there and all of a sudden realize that, oh, wow, there's no available crew here and we can't get on a soundstage because there's 5 other big budget shows just arrived. And so while I was at Disney, I had been noodling on this idea that there was a real opportunity to build a company that would help producers and production companies take advantage of this. Because if you're a producer or a smaller production company, you don't have the resources or understanding for how to solve this problem. And it takes a lot of time and research and experience to, one, just even understand that there is an opportunity there, and two, how to take advantage of it. And so the idea of StageRunner was really born out of that. And so when I left Disney, immediately started building StageRunner out as a platform to do just that, to work with producers and production companies, helping them to take advantage of the best tax incentive for their project, helping them realize the most significant savings that they could. And what happened was, as we started growing the business and working with both soundstage operators and film commissions around the world, one of the things that they started telling us was, hey, a few things. One, we need to be able to market ourselves and our opportunity to the global production community. And there's no way to do that. We, being those potential customers, we need to market ourselves. And the only way we can do that is through, I don't know, a full page ad in Variety or The Reporter, which is not really effective at all. And so they asked a number of times, one, can you help us to market ourselves to that audience? And so a light bulb really went off to us that we could really build out the StageRunner platform. If we could get it to scale, there would be a real opportunity to be a marketing platform for anyone who's working in the industry, any business who's working in the industry who really wants to reach line producers or production executives or studio executives. So that was what we saw as a real opportunity. The other was working more closely with soundstage owners, film commissions, and other companies, and helping them to build relationships. Another thing that I realized was many of these folks, one, not only do they not talk to each other, but they also don't have the strong relationships with the people who are their potential customers. And so as we started building and growing the business, really the consulting side of the business is what grew earliest and fastest. And the core of that business was helping them to strategically grow their business, both through partnerships that we offer, as well as introducing them to relationships and setting up meetings and introductions with all of the folks who I had been working with over the last, 30 years, heads of production and heads of visual effects and studio operations and government affairs, and all of those people who are so important. I'll just go back for a moment. When I was, a line producer and I would be deciding what soundstage that I wanted to work at, for me, it was never about, how much do they charge per square foot or what kind of equipment do they have? Sure, those things are important when you're making a decision. But first and foremost, the most important thing for me was, do I know and trust the person managing that soundstage? And are they going to protect me at all costs? And do I have a strong relationship with them? And so for us at StageRunner, the most important quality is that we help, soundstage owners to build those relationships so that those heads of production think of them first and trust them first and foremost over anything else. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. Yeah. No, that's good. Now let's talk challenges a little bit. What was the biggest challenge starting up? And what are a challenge or two that you face today?
When we first got started I was essentially building a business that had never existed before. There was no competition in the space. Soundstage owners, we'll call it as one sector within the industry, had never had a need to market themselves before. It just wasn't necessary because, truthfully, John, there wasn't enough inventory around the world. And so if you were a soundstage owner, you essentially had a wonderful business for the last 30 or 40 years where you would just answer the phone and someone would book your stage for years at a time. And most sound stages really were booked about 90% of the time. up until the real estate industry, private equity, and the studios realized this, especially as the industry was growing as a whole, everyone realized we're going to need a lot more space if the industry is going to continue to grow. And so we saw an incredible proliferation of building here in the US, in Canada, in the UK, and then every other, major production hub. Now you've got at minimum 3 top tier facilities in all of those areas. And so what happened, as far as, back to your question, what were the challenges, was essentially training the industry that it was now much different than it was previous to that, and that marketing themselves and building those relationships was not only going to be important, it was going to be required for them if they were going to be successful in the industry. And so there was a period of education in the beginning where people felt like, we've never needed to market before. We don't budget marketing in our annual operating expenses. And so there was a moment where I think there was a little bit of hesitancy. And then once a few of them got on board, we sort of took off from there. But also, I'll just go back to one other challenge, which is when you're building essentially a two-sided marketplace, which is what StageRunner initially was, two-sided marketplace where like, say Yelp or any other marketplace. On one side, you've got customers or Uber, let's say Uber. On one side, you've got, people who need a ride to the airport. And then on the other side, you have drivers who provide those rides to the airport. Well, you can't have one without the other. And so it's a really interesting business challenge, which is how do you build a two-sided marketplace when you can't have one without the other? And for it to operate accurately, effectively, you essentially have to be at scale from day one. And so that was an interesting business challenge that didn't happen on day one, but certainly took us a minute to get to that place where we eventually got to scale. And really the way that we did that was by building out the other platform side of the business. And that's really where we got into building out the StageRunner brand and building out Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, the website, and the newsletter, and really started breaking stories that were relevant and helpful to the overall production community. And what that did was it really allowed us to build and grow the StageRunner name and brand so that people were now going to StageRunner not only to solve their business problem, but also for every day as a habit for news. And we realized that there actually was a great opportunity for us to start telling those stories that weren't getting reported anywhere else. And you think like we've got, Deadline, The Reporter, and The Wrap, and all these other publications who do cover the entertainment industry, but really none of them are reporting on the production stories that matter so much to this community. And we've got an industry that now spends almost $200 billion a year on content. And so it's a really big industry with a lot of stories that actually matter to that industry. What shows are getting ordered, what movies are getting greenlit, where they're filming, who has a new incentive, what are the particulars of that incentive. And then also everything else that has to do with this moment in time in the business where everything is changing technologically. And those are really the stories that we've started reporting on that people are so interested in. What does the next chapter of production look like? And now we've got content creators and podcasters and video podcasts and gaming and all of the other areas of content that are all blending and merging with each other. And so we've got this incredibly interesting time for StageRunner to build on that and grow from there.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned trends and things that are evolving. Where do you see the marketplace going? Virtual production spaces, LED volumes, regional studio growth. You mentioned a couple there. Like, what is, kind of the marketplace going to be in a year, 2, 3 years?
Oh, John, I wish I knew. I wish I could answer that question. We are seeing, I think, this inflection point, which started at the end of last year and is really just getting a lot of traction now. And that is the studios and the streamers are understanding, seeing the need that they have to bring production costs down in a significant way. And that, I think, is the biggest headline of the year, is that production costs are coming down. I think we're going to see more and more content being produced, but I think it's going to be less of the bigger budget shows. And now we're going to be seeing a lot of new entrants into the market on the technology side. And that may be everything that you mentioned there, everything from AI to virtual production that allows every piece of the workflow is getting examined now. Everything from, storyboarding on the prep side to production itself to post-production. And then, the very end of post-production, transcription, localization, and delivery, where all of those different workflows within production are being examined by the studios, as well as entrepreneurs and startups are looking at ways to use technology to make content or the specific vertical within that content cheaper, faster, and better. And so it's a really interesting moment. I think it's scary for everyone, but I think it's also a really exciting moment and opportunity, because I do think that technology, when you think about every other industry, almost every other industry in the world has been significantly impacted by technology. And if you're being honest, you look at a standard TV set or a movie set, and they look pretty much the same as they did 100 years ago. Yeah, you've got, a bit more digital and some LED virtual production walls here and there. But I think now is the moment where you're going to really see that gun go off, and we're really going to see a much bigger proliferation of an examination of how can we speed up this workflow in a really significant way. And I'll also mention that as far as trends and what I see, what's old is new again. I think we're starting to see that right now at this moment in time, and specifically in television. For the last dozen years, as I mentioned, that moment when House of Cards came along at Netflix, it became who could make the biggest, most expensive, most cinematic show possible. And that's what we called prestige TV. And what happened then was everyone started making, 6 episodes or 8 episodes that now cost $200 million. And essentially what we saw was the feature market came to television, and all of those feature filmmakers, producers, and talent started making what we call television, but it really wasn't television. It was more like, 8-hour movies. And then the binge model happened where they were dropping, all 8 episodes at a time. And I think that over time, what we've seen is that the streamers are now starting to come around to where we started in the first place. If you look at a show like The Pit, which just dropped season 2, this is a show that is winning all kinds of awards and is getting all kinds of buzz. This is a show that now drops weekly on Thursday nights, is produced very inexpensively. They shoot it all on one set on the Warner Brothers lot. And they do 15 episodes every season. Each episode takes 9 days to shoot. And this is exactly what we did 20 years ago before the streamers came. And everyone is lauding, this model as though it's the new model for television. And I really do think that in the people that I'm talking to, everyone is now looking for their workplace comedy or their legal drama or their family drama. And so I think, quite honestly, what we're going to see is significant budget retraction, but not just you have to bring budgets down, but let's go back to that original model. We don't necessarily need, to have 14 locations in every episode or, have Brad Pitt and George Clooney starring in our show for it to be good or buzzworthy or connect with our customers. And so that's another one of the big trends that I think we're going to see this year, which I think is also very exciting. It's very exciting for as well for US production, because I think what that does is it really allows shows to be produced here cost effectively.
So, who is the most important audience for StageRunner in terms of absorbing the content that you guys are putting out?
Yeah, that's a great question. Our audience is the global film and television production community. That is really the nucleus of our audience. This is people who work in the industry or who want to work in the industry or used to work in the industry who need to be up on the latest trends that are happening in the industry. The news that we break directly impacts them from a knowledge standpoint, but it also can, if they're following StageRunner regularly, it gives them really an opportunity to have a leg up on, where their next job may be coming from, because we're breaking stories so early, oftentimes before a show even has a production office. If people are following StageRunner, they really have an opportunity to understand the latest trends, but also the latest shows and movies that are being greenlit. And then also on the technology side, we're doing really the heavy lifting there, because there are just so many companies who are popping up who are creating what sounds like very cool technology, but a lot of it isn't ready yet. And so there's so much noise in the market that you can get lost when God forbid you want to learn about how AI is impacting film and TV production. It can be very difficult to know even where to get started. And so for us, we're hoping to solve that problem.
Now, StageRunner's also going to have its own podcast. Talk a little bit about the inspiration of doing your own podcast and what it's going to involve.
Yeah, I'm very excited about this. The podcast is going to be co-hosted by Gannon Murphy. Gannon Murphy is a close friend and colleague. Gannon has as many years as me experience in production. He ran Cinelise for a long time and has deep breadth of knowledge in the production space, soundstage equipment, knows everyone in that world. And Gannon is just an incredibly curious person. And I find that I'm a big podcast listener myself. And the podcasts that I love to listen to are ones where the host is incredibly curious. And when I started talking to Gannon, immediately thought in the back of my mind, if I ever do a podcast, this is the guy I want to do it. He's an incredible listener, active listener. And so I always had this in the back of my mind that someday, if I ever do a podcast, that's who I want to work with. And it just turned out that he happened to be available and interested. We started having these discussions, and I started hearing from our audience as well as our clients that they want to hear long form discussions from all of the people that you and I have been talking about today. These are people who are starting new technology companies. These are, presidents of studios, producers, filmmakers, and it gives us an opportunity to have those long form conversations about really what does the next chapter of production look like and where is it all going, right? Everyone has, I think in this moment, so much anxiety because everything is changing. And for the first time, maybe in 100 years, everything is changing, but we don't know how and we don't know where it's going. As I mentioned, it's like when I started, we had broadcast television, but we all knew it was going to cable next. And then when we were in cable, well, we knew it was going, premium cable after that. And then we saw streaming coming after that. We knew everything was going to be going to streaming. And now we're in this moment where none of us are really sure where it's going. I mean, we know content creators are a thing. We know gaming is a thing. We know virtual production is a thing, but we don't really have a clear understanding of what the industry is going to look like in 5 or 10 years. And so if we can have, really interesting long form discussions with the people who are deep into the world of helping to shape and define what the next 5, 10 years looks like, for me in particular, those are conversations that I really want to hear. And I'm hopeful that, the StageRunner audience will feel the same way. So we're really excited about it.
Yeah, looking forward to that. For independent filmmakers and production professionals listening, what's one piece of advice that you'd offer for navigating the landscape that we're all in today?
this is something I think about a lot. We get a lot of notes from people who are, either graduating school or they want to get into the industry and they're looking for advice in this space. And there's a couple things that I always think about here. I often get notes on LinkedIn and other places where people say things like, hey, I'm really interested in being in the film industry. Can I take you to coffee sometime and pick your brain? I always think to myself, why would I go have coffee with a stranger that I don't know and give them a bunch of information? And so I urge people who want to get into the business to try something a little bit different. And that is, if you're gonna send a note, one, make it highly specific and targeted to the person that you're sending it to. Do some homework on the person. And second, instead of you sending that note asking how they can help you, offer to help them. And, when I first started in the industry, I was an intern, then I was a PA, I was an unpaid PA. And I don't think people quite understand, and maybe it's just not accepted in today's world, but there is, in my view, no better way to build relationships and learn the industry than going and working for free for a little while. And I know, listen, people, it's hard to do that and support yourself.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can somehow figure out a way to offer your services for free and you go and you do a good job for someone, I have no doubt that they will start paying you out of guilt, if nothing else, within a very short amount of time. And so to me, that is the life hack. It's not easy, but it is a life hack that I think works better than anything, which is just offering to go and learn and work for free. It gets you in the door, it starts a conversation, and eventually will lead to something. For people who are also looking to get into the industry now, in many ways, it has never been easier, John. We all have a phone. In our pocket is a high definition film and television studio. We all have access to global distribution for free in YouTube and many other platforms. And we all have the opportunity to build our own platforms and our own audiences. And so never before has it, in many ways, has it been easier. It's certainly harder than ever to stand out because so many people do, in fact, do this and build their own platforms and have their own audiences. But if you really are passionate about the arts and film and television, I urge people to not only get started with making and producing content, but also experimenting with all of the incredible tools that are out there. There are so many people that I talk to, John, who are very curious about AI, yet they haven't even played with any of the tools. They don't understand what they can do. They don't understand what the limitations are, yet they're terrified of it. And so I urge people also to do as much learning as possible with all of these tools, because some of them are great and they will spark all kinds of new ideas and help you realize what capabilities there are that can help you also then tell those stories. And more than ever right now, if you're looking to get a job at a studio or a production company or working for a producer, if you have a skill set and you understand those technologies as well as the social media platforms, you really are going to have a leg up, more really than anyone else. It's the kind of knowledge and experience that producers that I talk to are looking for more than anything else.
Jason, looking ahead, besides the new podcast, what's next for StageRunner and what excites you most about the future of platform?
Well, as I mentioned, I do think that we are in the most exciting time ever in the form of, let's say, content. And I think many of us feel very differently about maybe film and television versus podcasts or what content creators are doing. But almost every conversation I end with new people, I ask, do you think we're going to be spending more or less on content in the next 5 years? And across the board, everyone says more. And when people are concerned or worried about the future of the industry, I often pull that up in my mind as a moment to realize that, the industry in many ways has never been healthier, never been more interest in content. We've never seen also a more competitive, say, playground in people competing for people's attention. But more than ever, I think there is this incredible opportunity for content creators, for studios, for filmmakers, for production companies to create really compelling content. And so why I'm excited about StageRunner is, for us, we really want to be the leaders in helping people understand and navigate what that world looks like. And as more than ever, there's so much information out there and it's so confusing. And I think people need help and guidance as they manage this next phase of their career, or they're starting out in their career, figuring out, it used to be a very sort of linear career ladder depending on what you wanted to do. And now it feels very disparate. And so at StageRunner, we hope to help people navigate that through introducing them to both news as well as the conversations that we're having with people in the industry, hopefully helping them have a better time, enjoy our content, and help them more easily navigate this space in their career.
Well, to that point, where can our listeners learn more about you and StageRunner, connect, follow, all of those things? Go ahead and plug away.
Thank you for this opportunity. Yes. Well, of course, go to stagerunner.com, stagerunner.net. On social media, we are at StageRunner LA on Instagram and on TikTok. You can find me on LinkedIn, Jason Fisher, Fisher. Feel free to shoot me a note on LinkedIn anytime. I'm very active on LinkedIn. We StageRunner are very active on LinkedIn. And then within a few weeks, you'll be able to find the StageRunner podcast on Spotify and Apple and all the other podcast platforms. So I hope you guys will listen and, of course, watch the StageRunner podcast.
Well, Jason, this has been a really great and fascinating conversation. Thanks for taking the time to be with us today and share the StageRunner story. And we appreciate you being on the Film Florida podcast.
Thank you, John. Thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks for listening to the Film Florida podcast. For more information about Film Florida, go to filmflorida.org and like or follow our social media pages. If you're not already a member of Film Florida, please consider joining at filmflorida.org. Please also consider going to our website and donating $20.26 for our 2026 fundraising campaign. Check out the Film Florida merchandise at filmflorida.creator-spring.com, and please remember to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast.